Barack Obama has been called the most pro-abortion president in the nation's history. To see if this is true, we've come to Washington, D.C. to hear from pro-life leaders and a member of Congress. They'll tell us how the pro-life movement is responding to an aggressive war being waged against America's unborn babies. Stay with us. Since President Obama took office, he's been increasingly accused of enacting policies and programs that attack the very nature of democracy and the moral foundation on which our country was built. I met with Ken Blackwell, a senior fellow at the Family Research Council, to discuss how the president's policies diminish the importance of the individual and the effect his administration is having on the pro-life movement.
I think it's very important to look at the underlying thrust of the Obama administration. I think it was captured by a headline, a cover story in a Newsweek magazine in February. It said, "We're all socialists now." The Obama administration has been taking us towards a real European-style socialist state. And when you talk about the socialist state, you talk about diminishing the importance of the individual and the individual conscious. And so directly and indirectly, it's an assault on the pro-life ethic as we understand it. We see it now being expressed in governmental terms. We see it being expressed in social policy. When you diminish the family, you take the decision-making away from parents. After a while, what you see is a devaluing of individual life. And the pro-life movement has been about advancing the whole, not only pro-life ethic, but celebrating the individual and free will. So this is an attack on the very nature of our government. And when you talk about attacking the nature of our government, there's no more efficient way to do it than to advance a culture of death.
A lot of people have called Mr. Obama the most pro-abortion president in the nation's history. Do you think that's true?
Oh, I think that's a fair assessment. If you look at his appointments that he's made, if you begin to look at the diminished role of the family and the individual, if you look at his thrust towards a government controlled one-payer system of what I would call socialized medicine, you begin to appreciate that he has set up at least the apparatus to just decimate the pro-life ethic as we've come to know it and appreciate it. I don't think there's any reasonable person that could take exception to the fact that the Obama administration is the most pro-abortion administration in the history of this country since its inception as a country 233 years ago.
Congressman Chris Smith represents New Jersey's 4th District. For over 28 years, his dedication to helping unborn babies and their mothers and protecting human rights has been unmatched in Washington. Chris is gravely concerned about the damage President Obama will inflict on progress made by the pro-life movement. Many people are calling Barack Obama the most pro-abortion president in the history of the nation. Would you agree with that?
Brad, Obama is the abortion president. No one, even Bill Clinton, has not done more in so quick of a time and is poised to do even more damage to the sanctity of human life for the unborn and for their mothers than Barack Obama. Nowhere is this more evident in his wholesale buy-in to abortion on demand, which is the ultimate human rights abuse. It's the only abuse that has the audacity to call itself a right. And Obama is the abortion president and is promoting abortion domestically as well as internationally. And now we have an administration, and we have a president especially, who can woo a lot of people with his charisma. And I often thought, now here's a man who's been given so much. Barack Obama has talent, He's very articulate, although he does rely on a teleprompter. But he comes across, you know, as a reasonable guy. And yet his deeds are as dark and malicious as it gets when it comes to unborn children. He is the abortion president. The ultimate human rights abuse is murdering unborn children, wounding their moms, and then calling it a right. I mean, that is the ultimate oxymoron in my view. And yet this man excels at it. And it's, you know, and he gets away with it because the press, by and large, give him a free pass. There are a lot of dead babies, and there will be more because this man was in the White House.
When we return, we'll meet Dr. Charmaine Yost and investigate the dangerous and deceptive ways Barack Obama is furthering his abortion agenda.
Whether you're a student needing answers, a parent needing help, or a concerned citizen wanting to make a difference, Life Issues Institute has the resources you need to put your values into action. Life Issues Institute is an international educational organization committed to protecting innocent human life. Life Issues Institute knows what it takes. That's why millions throughout the world turn here for help. Life Issues Institute has authored more pro-life publications than any other entity in the world, and its materials are printed in over 30 languages. Radio broadcasts, newsletters, and a website filled to the brim with the answers you're looking for are just a click away. Go to facinglife.tv and click on the link to Life Issues Institute to find out more about how you can change the heart of a nation.
Dr. Charmaine Yost is the president and CEO of Americans United for Life. She began her career in the White House during the Reagan administration and has provided congressional testimony before both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Most recently, Charmaine testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the confirmation of Judge Sonia Sotomayor to the United States Supreme Court. She stresses President Obama is using the term common ground to mislead citizens about his pro-abortion agenda. Give me some specific examples of what makes Barack Obama the abortion president.
Well, you know what makes him so dangerous, if I can change your question just a little bit as an abortion president, is the fact that he's very subtle about it in his rhetoric. His actions are a bit like a brute club, but the rhetoric is very smooth, and that's of course what we've come to expect from a president who's as gifted as he is. We are consistently asked about his common ground agenda that he likes to talk about. You know, he just came back from meeting with the Pope and telling the Pope that he was committed to reducing the rates of abortion. Well, the bottom line is, it's a pretty simple answer. If you continue to increase the funding for abortion, I'm not exactly certain how you end up getting less of it. But that's what we see from this president, is talking about common ground, but then having policies that go directly opposite it. You know, you and I have been on the side of common ground for a long time. The abortion movement, well, let's talk about the abortion movement. They consistently oppose things that the vast majority of Americans do support. There's a lot of common ground on parental notification. I think of friends of mine, dear friends of mine that I went to college with, who would classify themselves as so-called pro-choice. But if we sit down and talk about our daughters, there's no way we're going to disagree about the fact that if your daughter's going to have a major medical procedure, you want to know about it. That's just basic common sense. That's common ground. And yet the abortion movement, including our president, is adamantly opposed to anything that looks even remotely like parental notification, informed consent, bans on partial birth abortion. And, you know, so that's where you see the hollowness of the rhetoric.
Wendy Wright is the president of Concerned Women for America and has been active in pro-life and family issues for over 15 years. Most recently, Wendy took part in a meeting at the White House where pro-abortion and pro-life leaders were invited by President Obama to come together and work to find common ground. But Wendy soon found out the president had been using political hyperbole to deceive citizens about his agenda. Now, Wendy, you were part of a gathering at the White House of people to find common ground on abortion. How did that meeting go?
Well, I was invited to be a part of this grand strategy to come up with common ground between pro-life leaders and pro-choice or pro-abortion leaders to find ways that we can agree on certain things. And it's a pretty difficult project. You know, I gotta say, it's been tried in the past. There have been efforts in the 20 years I've been involved in the pro-life movement. I've been aware of various efforts to find common ground between the two sides, and none has been successful because we're coming from two completely different viewpoints. One that values the sanctity of innocent human life, and the other that does not. So it's pretty difficult to find something to agree on.
Now, I understand at this particular meeting at the White House, though, there was a surprising revelation that surfaced during that meeting. Tell me about that.
If you ask nearly anybody what they think President Obama's goal is on abortion, they'll say he wants to reduce the number of abortions. But I listened to his speech very carefully, and in fact, he did not say he wants to reduce the number of abortions. And the reason I listened carefully was because 2 days before his speech at Notre Dame, I was in the White House for the meeting on common ground, to find common ground. And there were maybe 20 people who were pro-abortion, maybe 4 people who were pro-life in the room, and various people spoke and gave their ideas of what they think could reduce unintended pregnancies or abortions. And then Melody Barnes, who's the head of the Domestic Policy Council and the person in charge in the White House to come up with a plan to find common ground, she turned to me and said, "Now we want to hear from everyone in the room, so Wendy, we'd like to hear from you." And I mentioned that the goals have to be very clear in order to reduce unintended pregnancies and abortions. At that point, Melody Barnes interrupted me, and she said something like, I need to correct you. And then she said, "It is not our goal to reduce abortions." Well, I was a bit surprised by that. And then she went on to say, "It's our goal to reduce the need for abortions." So I said, "How will you quantify that? I mean, how would you know if you've reduced the need for abortions?" People need to understand that it's not their goal. It's not President Obama's goal to reduce the number of abortions, as stated by his key person in the White House who's been tasked with this effort. Because I think many people are being tricked. They think that it is the president's goal to reduce the number of abortions.
In a moment, we'll investigate the ways in which Barack Obama is furthering abortion through nationalized health care reform.
Thank you for inviting us into your home. Each week we feature real people who deal with real-life issues head-on. Some of their experiences are uplifting, while others will break your heart. But in the end, the message is clear. Those who follow biblical principles on the issues of life are blessed. Become a partner with us in providing a positive, life-affirming message to help change the way the next generation values innocent human life. Please consider a generous gift to help offset the costs of producing this important quality programming. You can donate on our secure website at facinglife.tv or by calling the phone number on your screen during normal business hours. Together, we can make a real difference for life.
Before entering office, Barack Obama promised Planned Parenthood that passing the Freedom of Choice Act, known as FOCA, would be a priority. FOCA would eliminate every protective law for unborn babies on abortion, resulting in government-funded abortion on demand. While FOCA has been introduced in the past, it's never succeeded because of its extreme nature. However, President Obama has found a way to embed FOCA within the health care reform bill. Pro-life leaders in Washington are making it their top priority to fight this dangerous bill. Let me ask you about the nationalized health care plan that's been proposed. How exactly do you think that will affect the life issues of abortion, end-of-life issues and such?
You know, I am so glad for you to be bringing this up, because pro-life Americans across the country really have got to get mobilized on this issue. You know, part of the challenge that we face is there has been such an onslaught of anti-life activity, but the health care so-called reform issue is really, really a central one for us, because what we're seeing is, I think we've talked a lot about the funding issue, but the real issue with health care reform is they want to not just fund abortion with our taxpayer dollars. They want to establish abortion as a fundamental right through health care. They can't do it through legislation because the American people don't support that. They haven't been able to completely do it through the Supreme Court the way they'd want to. So they're turning to health care to make it a mandate, which is slightly different than funding, but it's a critically important point for pro-life Americans to understand, that we've got to stand against this, because this is a shift in understanding of what abortion means in terms of public policy that will be very hard to roll back.
The abortion industry is working very hard to make sure that nationalized health care includes abortion mainstreamed within the system, meaning every hospital would have to provide it, doctors would have to provide it, taxpayers would have to fund it. The abortion industry sees this effort to create socialized or nationalized health care as their ticket to undoing every regulation and ensuring that abortion will always be paid for and covered through a government system. Right now, America is on the path of creating a healthcare system that is going to cost far more than the healthcare system we have now. Who's going to pay for it? If we're killing off the next generation, it's a recipe for disaster.
He wants to now put massive amounts of taxpayer funds into not just paying for the abortion itself, but providing additional venues, abortion mills, by hooking Planned Parenthood and all of these other so-called providers, these abortionists, into the mainstream of healthcare provision in this country. And that will only lead to more abortions. It'll be marketed. Our young people will be deceived, as they have been so often, by these organizations. And you'll see more dead babies and more wounded mothers. That, to me, will be the most catastrophic impact in the first year of this man's presidency, because he talks about reducing abortions. It's a big lie, because all of his actions are simultaneously expanding abortion. You know, he'll say, let's do more adoptions. Who's not for adoption? I mean, who's not for some of these other, why aren't you for parental notification, which he wants to get rid of? Why aren't you for women's right to know laws, which he wants to scrap? They have been proven to lessen the number of abortions, because once women do see what an unborn child looks like and possible deleterious effects to her life, physically and psychologically, many of these women leave. They don't want to be in the clinic anymore. And regrettably, he wants to scrap all of that, and he's using health care reform on that basis too, to try to do an end run and do the Freedom of Choice Act through that legislation.
Within health care reform, President Obama is working to revoke the conscience protections for physicians and other health care professionals. If passed, all health care providers could be forced to participate in abortion against their will and against their conscience. Now, some are very concerned about the conscience regulations that protect medical professionals such as physicians, nurses, radiologists, every pharmacist, from being forced to participate in some way, directly or indirectly, in abortion process. Is that a concern that AUL is looking at?
Everybody needs to understand that this is a real problem. It's sort of new, and so we're working on building the foundational understanding of the issue amongst people. Part of what concerns me is that as Americans, we are so used to the reality of the freedom of speech and the freedoms of conscience that we do have, that we tend to just assume that it will always be there. You know, that's our reality that we're used to. The truth of the matter is that there is a continual assault on our freedoms of conscience coming out of this administration, and we see that as a coming threat that's going to only build and get worse.
You would think that those who believe in this idea that individuals should choose for themselves what they want to do, particularly with their own bodies, that then doctors and nurses should have the choice to not participate or engage or commit in abortions. So it's clearly against their fundamental slogan that they're in favor of choice.
Coming up, we'll learn how the pro-life movement is gaining the support of a majority of Americans.
Whether you're a student needing answers, a parent needing help, or a concerned citizen wanting to make a difference, Life Issues Institute has the resources you need to put your values into action. Life Issues Institute is an international educational organization committed to protecting innocent human life. Life Issues Institute knows what it takes. That's why millions throughout the world turn here for help. Life Issues Institute has authored more pro-life publications than any other entity in the world, and its materials are printed in over 30 languages. Radio broadcasts, newsletters, and a website filled to the brim with the answers you're looking for are just a click away. Go to facinglife.tv and click on the link to Life Issues Institute to find out more about how you can change the heart of a nation.
With recent polls showing 51% of Americans consider themselves to be pro-life, leaders in Washington are hopeful about grassroots support. Charmaine Yost and Congressman Chris Smith are optimistic that this temporary time of political challenge will eventually pass.
We were telling people that we weren't surprised by those numbers and that they weren't exactly new.